All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly is on the road today in Boston. I just came from the CDO IQ event, which was absolutely humming. People were everywhere talking all about, of course, data and analytics, but AI. And we're going to talk about preparing your organization to leverage the power of AI. We're going to talk today about success with AI, an open lakehouse approach, and what all that means. We're going to talk about federated architectures and really future-proofing your environment. We now understand in this industry the tremendous value of being able to analyze data, but not all data can fit inside of a data warehouse. And then it's funny because I've been in this industry a long time, and I remember as the whole data lake movement went forward, I thought to myself, gosh, are we kind of making the same mistakes again, thinking we can fit every piece of data into a data lake? And then you got concepts like a data swamp being thrown out there and people worrying about performance issues and a bunch of different things are happening. And then what takes place? Well, this whole movement towards an open table format. Now, there are several options you have there. Apache Iceberg has definitely taken the industry by storm. It has captured the imagination of data practitioners everywhere. And of course, I just learned today, in fact, that Trino was built in conjunction with Iceberg. So there's a nice pairing there. And anyone who's done software development knows that the kernel is really important, and kind of knowing where you want to go is very important in terms of being able to efficiently build out a product, especially one that works at tremendous scale. And that's what we're talking about here. So we're going to talk about an open lakehouse approach. We have an all-star cast lined up for you folks. We're going to be hearing Justin Borgman of Starburst, from David of a company called Estuary, and Vrashank Jain has joined us from Dell as well. So I'm very curious to know, I'll throw it over to you first, Vrashank. Dell, of course, has this AI factory with NVIDIA doing a lot of interesting stuff. And guess what? There's a lot of data that's still on-prem. I often joke that the rumors of on-prem's demise have been greatly exaggerated. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. In fact, I think there's a bit of a resurgence and an awareness around the value of having your on-prem data, whether it be for AI, whether it be for IP, intellectual property, personally identifiable information. There are various reasons why that makes sense. And of course, Dell knows all about that. So tell us quickly about yourself and what you're working on with Dell.
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. My name is Vrashank. I'm from the product management team in what we call the AI and data solutions product team within our infrastructure group within Dell. So we're primarily focused on our enterprise business and trying to drive our solutions and our products into the AI and data space. Yeah, and I think, I mean, you couldn't have said it better. AI and data are both big strategic priorities for us as a company. And we've already, seen how the AI has generated a tremendous demand for infrastructure as everybody's trying to race to get there, to prepare for that onslaught that's just coming. And unless you've been living under a rock, we've obviously partnered very heavily with vendors like NVIDIA. And of course, we've launched the Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA, but we're also starting to do that with AMD and Intel as well. Now,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, please go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing for the audience to really appreciate and understand is, in this world of AI, your data should be your strategic advantage. The data that you have in your data center already, maybe it's in the cloud. Obviously, a lot of companies are building on top of Snowflake and Databricks and other environments like that. But the point is that your data, which you have in your data center right now, that really should be your strategic advantage if it's AI ready, if it's governed, if you've done some of your homework to really understand your landscape. But it's very important to appreciate the value that your data brings to your business model and your company, right?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the reason why we're getting so much attention on that AI factory is because I think people are starting to realize that the investment that they're making in AI has to be within their control and increasingly within the four walls of their data center, because that is where they want to run the most strategic investments. And so I think in that race to get to the AI factory, I think we're seeing almost every conversation gravitate towards a modern data architecture that can feed the beast, if you will. And I think everybody knows, I mean, in a very folksy way, I'll say good data leads to good AI. I think we've heard that over and over again. But what does that really mean? If you take a step back and try to figure out where your data is, some people say 40% of the data continues to remain on premise. Some people say more. But the point here is, I think a lot of the data that lives on premise is often the most closely guarded, and therefore often has the most. It sort of represents the treasure trove of information. That's what you really want access to drive the best AI initiatives. And of course, now, I'm not saying all the data is on premise. And I think some of the data is going to be in the cloud. Some of that data is going to be in multiple clouds. So it's really multi-cloud, I think, the answer. And it's a bit of everything. And I think when people think about what data that is, a lot of people immediately think, oh, it's PDFs, it's documents, it's OneDrive, because people are starting to build chatbots, and all of the experiments and all of the demos talk about how you can go query your GitHub pages. That's great. But it turns out that, I mean, that's not wrong. I'm just saying that the view is incomplete. A lot of the good data in businesses is structured, and those things have to get into AI initiatives. So like I said, data residing in lakes and warehouses and databases, but that data is not immediately useful. You can't just take it and throw it at the LLM and say, go figure, can you give me the answer here? And that's just going to be very hard for the LLM to do, because the LLM doesn't quite know how you define your data, right? So I think when scientists, data scientists want to sort of bring this data in front of the LLM, they realize that it's not immediately useful. You have to make it ready. You have to sort of massage it, and I would say package it as a data product, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I think the industry is starting to realize, number one, you need a modern data architecture. You need federation, which means you need data that's on premise and in the cloud, and you need that data to be in a data lakehouse, which is by far, the strongest architecture we have today in the industry. Now, when people think lakehouse, I think people think cloud, and many customers are not wrong to think about that. They've made it really easy in the cloud. I get it, but I think and realize, I think the challenges of remaining on premise are complexity and how hard is it to manage. So I think that's where the genesis of the Dell Starburst partnership really comes in, right? How do we take this amazing concept that's the lakehouse and really try to make it simple and easy and open on premise, so that we don't lose that entire group of people who are really struggling to get their data into a better shape.
Right. No, that's an excellent summation. And ideal architecture, I think that's a perfect segue to Justin Borgman from Starburst. And Justin, you've got some real history in this industry too. You came, of course, from Teradata, and your co-founders were the ones who also helped kind of launch Presto, which became Trino. And you understand, the reason I'm bringing up Teradata is you understand that it takes a long time to optimize a query optimizer, right? I mean, this is a fairly complex thing, and it's really important too, because the query optimizer is what gets things done efficiently. And I think people have learned now that there's a tremendous amount of attention on data warehousing in the cloud. But guess what? It's not that cost efficient, depending upon how you do it. And we'll get into more of these details over the course of the hour, but I did want to throw it over to you. With the ideal architecture is federated. You're not going to get the whole world into any box or into any lake. So how do you do that? Well, Iceberg is part of that, but Trino is a big part of that as well. Tell us a bit about your journey in Starburst and what you're doing with Dell and with your other clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. I think first and foremost, I would say, a lot of the early pioneering in the world of data lakes was back in the Hadoop era, 15 years ago. But one of the things that's changed dramatically over that 15-year period is the level of performance and functionality that you can now get out of lakes. And we think lakes, particularly storing data in open formats like Iceberg, provide now, performance that is equivalent to a traditional data warehouse, be that an on-prem data warehouse like Teradata, or even a cloud data warehouse as well. And so that trade-off between cost and performance has improved dramatically in the customer's favor. And I think that's one of the things that's changed dramatically, and why there's more and more attention on these lake houses. To the point of federation, though, you're absolutely right. We don't believe that you'll ever get all of your data in one place, regardless of what that one place may be. And so there are always going to be circumstances where querying other data sources external to that lake has value, where you want to join a table that lives in your Oracle database or SQL Server or Data Mart or whatever the case may be, and being able to join that with a table in Iceberg in AWS S3 or on-prem in the Dell Lakehouse, has a tremendous amount of value for you as a customer. So we've really built this company, frankly, to provide customers with optionality, really the freedom to decide where that data is going to be stored, where they're going to run that infrastructure. I think Vrashank makes some excellent points about AI really driving greater focus to on-prem data centers, both because of the strategic nature, the security, as he said, those are sort of the crown jewels of the data that you may hold, but also economics. And, it's, as James Carville said in 1992, it's the economy stupid to some degree, right? Like you got to get the economics right. And, the sheer computing power that people are going to be throwing at AI, you've got to be thinking about the economic consequences. And so where am I going to get the best TCO? And that's ultimately what we want to offer our customers as well. And, give them the option to decide how and where that data is going to be stored.
Yeah, and let's get into a bit of the process around analytical discovery and being able to play with data. A lot of people understand this concept of an analytics sandbox. And we also appreciate that the data warehouse is going to remain a viable and significant force in the enterprise for its trustworthiness, for its speed, its performance, its durability. But you don't want to rush things into the warehouse. And so this Lakehouse architecture allows companies to play with data and then maybe decide to get it into the warehouse. Maybe at a certain point of your experimentation, you realize, hey, we really do want this data from our support ticketing system in the warehouse because we see these business use cases. So I think that's a very valuable step in the process that we've opened up with a Lakehouse architecture. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It really, lowers the barrier to experimentation, to the evolution of that data. Absolutely. I mean, I think, fundamentally, it puts customers in control of what they put into that lake, how much data they put into that lake, and gives them a lot of freedom and flexibility.
That's really important stuff. And let's get our final guest in just for a couple of minutes here, at least. David Yaffe is in the background from Estuary. And David, you folks have another really interesting perspective on all this, on what I kind of dubbed as CDC for data integration pipelines. Tell us a little bit about what Estuary does and how you're helping to fuel these environments.
Yeah, I love your analogy there. That's pretty amazing because you kind of like glommed onto exactly what we do from a very technical perspective right away. But yeah, what we do is we try to make data mobile so it can be anywhere you want it, right? Data exists in business applications, databases, file stores, and it's all very important for running a business. Some of that you need for analytics, some of it for operations, and some of it for AI and various other things across their business. So our goal is to just make it so that you can easily access it and put it wherever you want, potentially even do some lightweight transformations to clean it up before it goes somewhere, and really just have it at your fingertips. So all of the with the simplicity of something like a point and click type of UI. So that's really what we do. We got here from a very different business space. So I used to be in the advertising space. It's a weird space to come from, but it turns out there's a lot of data in advertising, and you care quite a bit about low latency. So that's how we ended up getting here. My co-founder actually built a streaming system himself. It's a little bit like Kafka, but it's backed by cloud storage. So that's the genesis.
Yeah, and to explain to the radio audience there, when I mentioned CDC, that's change data capture, which is it's an old mechanism where you don't move all the data, you just move the data that changed. And so it's a much more efficient way of doing that. And what these folks at Estuary done have taken that concept and applied it to the idea of data pipelines. So they're the ones that are fueling, that are enabling data to get into these environments. So you've got Dell, you've got Starburst, you've got Estuary. I mean, these are three companies that collaborate. And of course, there are other companies in these spaces as well. But there is something to be said for chemistry, and maybe I'll throw this over to Vrashank to kind of comment on. There's something to be said for chemistry, and in the enterprise, you always have to meet customers where they are, right, Vrashank?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think what David's working on is very important, mostly because when we talk to enterprises today, I think they talk about where their data is, and right now it's all over the place. it's in so many silos that it's getting really hard for them to actually get their hand on any good data. So when we talk to them about, hey, you should be investing in a lakehouse, the first question they ask is, well, how do I actually hydrate it? How do I bring the data into the lakehouse, and how do I keep it in sync? Because I have databases that get refreshed sometimes by the minute, by the hour, by the day. And do you expect me to lift and shift data over and over again from all of those sources into the lakehouse? I think the answer is certainly not. We think there's going to be a one-time hydration, but then over time you have to keep it in sync, and that in sync is exactly what I think Dave is working on. So yeah, I think that's part of the meeting the customer where they are. But I think the other part of it is sometimes those customers are actually very eager to move away from where they are. So a lot of them are still invested in legacy tooling, legacy formats, and they're itching to get out of that. And they know they want to get to Iceberg because they've read about it and they've heard about it. But how do I actually get there? How do we help customers finally, retire or at least rationalize how much of the legacy they need to keep, and how do you actually get to the next frontier of sort of what the data architecture should be? I think that's where we have to take it step by step, and we have to think about which use cases should go first, which use cases come after. And I think the end goal for any IT team or any data team at the end of the day is to make this migration disruption free, right? The end user, the analyst, the scientist should not worry about how fast this migration is happening or not. And how do you do that? You basically need some sort of federation capability at the end of the day. You need the same tool that basically can hook up to data, whether it's in a legacy tool or in a new tool. And I think that's where something like Starburst and Neutrino really help, because they can query the HDFS data, they can query the data that's in Teradata, but they can also query the data in Iceberg. And in fact, you can do it all at the same time. So at the end of the day, you don't want to have the end users realizing how fast or slow you're going.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. And I'm always a big fan of the marshaling area. And that's what we're now seeing with Iceberg, is it's a good marshaling area for data, for big data, to be able to connect it to these environments, as you suggest, and then be able to leverage it. And it should be transparent to the user. The user shouldn't have to care about that stuff. But folks, we'll pick this up right after the break. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all about the open lakehouse. Doesn't that sound cool? Who doesn't want a nice lakehouse? Okay, this is for data, but of course it comes from the data warehouse, and then we have the data lake, and then guys are like, wait a minute, we want the best of both worlds. We want to be able to use the performance of the data warehouse, the trustworthiness, the certifiable data that is deterministic, but we also want to play around with stuff. And so we want a lot of data to be able to play around with. And the thing with AI is AI really likes the gritty, granular data. AI wants the details. It doesn't just want summaries. So in many ways, business intelligence and how it is operated is a very different thing from artificial intelligence, or at least the AI that we're talking about these days. Because with BI, you're just rolling things up, right? You want totals and aggregates and things of this nature, visualizations on top of that. With the AI, you want to feed it lots of really rich, granular data. You want all that context. And so, not to get too historical, but you think about how we got here. Well, data warehouses were invented because people realized you couldn't query these operational systems, like an ERP, for example. It's hard to query. It wasn't built for that purpose. It was built to transact, for OLTP, as they call it, online transactional processing. It wasn't built for the analytics. So we built data warehouses, but those architectures go back 35, 40 years now, when processors were slow, the pipes were very thin, the storage was expensive. Well, all that's now changed. Now we have much more powerful processors, fatter connections, cheaper storage. So everything has changed, and everything is going to continue to change. And so how do you future-proof your analytic foundation to be able to leverage what comes down the pike? And that's federation, that's Trina, which comes from Presto, and Justin Borgman, you know a whole lot about that. You're really enabling a future-proofing of the analytical environment, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We think the key to that is open formats and open engines. I think on the open format side, it feels like the industry has unanimously decided that Iceberg is the winner. Of course, there are other formats. We support those too, whether that's Hudi or Delta or Parquet files, you name it. But Iceberg has clearly won the day in terms of becoming that de facto format for storing your data. And what that gives you as a customer is the ability to leverage a variety of engines to access the same data without having to be locked into a traditional database or traditional data warehouse, which is a very powerful thing. And we think similarly, you should pair that with an open engine. And as you mentioned in the opener, when Netflix created Iceberg, it was created to go with Trino or Presto as it was known back then. And so, within the open source community, this clearly has become the de facto open data stack for how you build effectively an open data warehouse or open data lakehouse by leveraging these two components. And so, at Starburst, our goal is to just make that easy, make that as easy as possible to basically have a turnkey, open lakehouse, or as we like to say, an ice house, because it's really an iceberg lakehouse that, gives you all the performance and functionality of a traditional data warehouse without the lock-in. And because those are decoupled components, both the open engine and the open format, you have the ability to change those components. And I think, whenever you think about future-proofing, to the point of your question, modularity allows for future-proofing. Like that essentially allows you to change components as, newer technologies come to bear or newer trends come to bear. And I think interestingly, maybe to tie this back to part of Vrashank's, earlier piece, there may be a shift in the not too distant future to move more data back on-prem. And again, if you're storing data in Iceberg tables and they're sitting in S3 today, it's very easy to move those into, object storage on-prem, or similarly, maybe from Cloudera Hadoop from HDFS and move that into, Dell object storage. So, it gives you portability. And again, I think that's another, really key piece to building something that can stand the test of time.
Yeah, and real quick, just to put some meat on the bones here for the audience, Justin, I'll throw this back over at you. Let's say you have an acquisition. You've bought another company. They have an Oracle database with lots of customer data in it, for example. You don't want to have to pull every last bit of that data out of a data warehouse, push it all into some new environment. I mean, I've been doing this show for 17 years, and 17 years ago, I thought to myself, all this ETL stuff is crazy. Like this, we have to stop the madness. We're just moving data around and around and around and around, only using 5 to 10% of it. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so this federated architecture that Trino and Starburst bring allow you to point at those different environments, that Oracle database, at a data warehouse in the cloud, at some other data in Iceberg tables, and build your query to understand the relationship between these things. So you're really opening the canvas much wider in terms of what questions people can ask and how they can ask them without requiring all of this buildup to just get to that point of asking the question, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Actually, M&A has turned out to be a pretty good use case for us where, company A buys company B. Company B is in a different cloud using different database systems, and you want to realize the synergy that was promised in that acquisition as quickly as possible. And very often synergy today is frankly data integration. How do I leverage the data that I've just acquired through that M&A event? So federation is certainly, that's a great use case for federation. And from our standpoint, it's really all about applying the right strategy to the right use case. And we think it's always going to be a mix of those things. Maybe you're accessing that data that you just acquired through federation, and at the same time, you're capturing and ingesting data from your operational systems, leveraging Estuary and landing that in a lake, and being able to incorporate all of those analyses together through a single query is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And Vrashank, I'll bring you back in because that concept of gravity was floating around in my mind. People have realized data has gravity. And even though we worked very hard to get it all up into orbit, which is the cloud, you realize at a certain point, if you have the capacity to use a federated engine to analyze data that is piecing together something from the cloud, from on-prem, from different environments, that means you don't have to move all that data, that sort of forklifting of data, which is very painful, very expensive, and it's also error prone too. So I think the reality is now set in, now that the cloud is more understood than it was 10 years ago, that data does have gravity, and we shouldn't move large amounts of data if we don't have to, right, Vrashank?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we use just the 80-20 rule in this type of a conversation. I mean, people should be really moving 20% of the data that gets them 80% of the value. I feel like today, so many enterprises, we're not immune to this as a company too. I mean, so many enterprises go on this 3-year, 5-year journey to consolidate everything to get to that next single source of truth. And 3 years down the line, and you ask, where are we? And it turns out there's actually more data that's now come in, and we're lagging behind because the velocity of the data that's coming in will always outstrip anybody's ability to truly consolidate into a single place. It's just it's a futile effort. So to your point, I mean, rather than trying to consolidate everything, let's federate, get access into the hands of the users, let them tell us what data is truly useful and what's not. And then when you know what's useful, let's consolidate that. And when you do that, let's keep it open. Let's bring that into Iceberg. And therefore pit the vendors against each other, right? Like let yourself be in control of the data, and let the compute vendors fight each other to get the hands onto your compute dollars. I think that's the biggest revolution that Iceberg is really driving here. It's bringing back the negotiation power back into the hands of the customer.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. And Justin, I'll throw this one over to you, and then maybe we'll get David back into the mix in a second here. But the other side of this equation, that's a big side, is governance. Governance, is auditability, is knowing who's using which data where in what context. And that's one thing that this federated approach also enables, because inside of this environment, that's where you're managing which tables are being touched, who's analyzing what. So you have that auditability, which means you have governance, right, Justin?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And that's essential, especially for the types of customers we work with, which tend to be large enterprises, where access controls are just an absolute prerequisite. And being able to provide both role-based and attribute-based access controls is essential. And you're right that, if you think of Trino and Starburst as a single point of access, you simultaneously can have a single point of access control, which is certainly a powerful phenomenon.
And Dave, I'll bring you back in to kind of comment on the hydration side of this equation. You are going to need to move some data around, or at least create these pipelines between different environments, right? So to have that capacity of being agile in that sense is really important, because traditional ETL, traditional ELT, it's never going to go away. I mean, these things have very long tails to them. But if you want to be agile, if you want to be responsive to your environment, and like you were talking about in advertising, there's a ton of data, and it has to be very low latency in order to calculate and determine where to place the ad and which ad to place, and understand if it's working or not. All that stuff, that's kind of in your DNA, right? Can you talk about that need for agile connectivity to data sources?
Yeah, for sure. And I totally agree with what everyone's saying here. Right now, we're living in this like weird swing of a world where we've swung towards moving all of data into a data warehouse, which doesn't make much sense, right? It should really be what you need to get into that data warehouse. And like one of the core use cases here that we're talking about is if you don't really want to query a production system that you might cause an impact on if you're gonna query it, right? You don't want to bring down production. That's the reason for the move into data warehouses. But short of that, we should really be thinking like, do we actually have to move all of this data that we're not going to be querying regularly? When you do make that decision of what you're going to move, I totally agree with you. These business systems, they exist all over your infrastructure. It's very important that you're going to need to connect to them, and that can be various different formats. Types of systems, right? Like SaaS systems are very different to connect to than database systems, and a database system might not have a schema. So how are you going to query that within an open table format? So all these things are considerations with the connectivity side of things, and I think that they're really important things just to have like a solution that's on your fingertips for when you need that, instead of taking 6 months to put it together when you realize you have the problem.
Yeah, right. And, I'm going to throw a bit of a hard question over to Justin. Let's see, a little bit of a curveball to you. One of the cool things about the amount of observability that we have these days, and the amount of effort that's been placed into understanding the cost of compute and the cost of movement and the total cost of ownership of these solutions, is that we are able to get a much finer control on what things cost and what the return on investment is, right? Because in the old days of data warehousing, you didn't really have that capacity. So it was hard to tell And I know Snowflake tried some things with user groups or resource groups, I think they call it. Other people have tried things, but we're getting there. And that's incredibly valuable for the business person who supports these initiatives, right? To be able to point to the value, point to the cost and the total cost of ownership. Can you kind of talk about that and how you're able to do that maybe better than we were in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the combination of that observability that you describe, as well as the fact that increasingly these systems are consumption oriented in terms of how those costs are measured and ultimately charged back to customers. So, and Starburst is no exception. You know, we're a consumption oriented model as well, which means that you can actually get quite granular on that ROI that you're describing. You know, with Starburst, we actually also track, you know, who is issuing what query and how long that query took. And so you can actually have a very fine-grained chargeback model internally where you know that the marketing team is costing you, you know, XYZ, and, you know, the CEO's dashboard costs, you know, this, because you know exactly the costs of those queries. And that's, I think, very powerful. And especially, again, you know, if we tie it back to, you know, iceberg in the lake for a moment and the freedom of choice over what engine to perform what workload, you can now take this to a greater degree of control and say, hey, you know what, that application that's running on Snowflake today that's costing me $50,000 a year, you know what, actually, maybe that would cost $20,000 a year on Starburst. I'll move that workload over, but I'll leave this other workload on Snowflake, which makes sense to leave there. You know, like you really have this freedom of choice now where you can be working off the same data in the lake, but choosing the right engine for the job at the right moment in time. And I think that's a level of flexibility that the database industry has never provided customers before until now.
Wow, that's very, very interesting because I'm always putting myself in the shoes of the end user, of the business person who has to sign on a dotted line, sign some contracts, invest money. These things take time to build. They take time to leverage. They take even more time to generate value. And then to be able to prove out that value becomes incredibly powerful. I think generally speaking, the business world now really does understand analytics is key. Data is the fuel for analytics, but you got to be able to ask different questions, and not every question is going to fit inside of a SQL query, right? So you have to kind of think outside the box, and that's kind of what Iceberg does. It allows the data to think outside the box and to be outside the box, and it allows you also to get this management layer. And you know, we'll pick this up in the next segment, folks, but I promise it's really important to have this marshaling area for your query engine and for building your pipelines and building your queries, because the data all around it is going to change. The people who are using it are going to change. The data sources are going to change. So you need one area that's your constant for being able to manage and govern this whole effort, which is very important. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, your host here, Eric Cavanaugh, with an all-star cast. I'm so excited about the show today. We've been talking to Justin Borgman of Starburst, Vrashank Jain of Dell, and David Yaffe of a company called Estuary. And Vrashank, I'll throw it back over to you. You know, Dell really pioneered just-in-time manufacturing, and this is, gosh, like 30 odd years ago. So Dell has innovation baked into its DNA. And now if you kind of look at what's happening in this data world, it's kind of like a metaphor to what Dell did in the manufacturing world, where the product is now analytics or data products, and the component parts of that are data and data sources and algorithms and all this kind of fun stuff. And it's really reflective of that innovation. What do you think about that, Vrashank?
Dude, you got a Dell. You know, that's how it all started. We're still here. But no, you're right. I mean, I think the constant theme, I think, across those many years and even decades at this point is simplicity, and how you can take what is arguably such a complex environment with so many intricate pieces, and how do you actually make them so easy to sort of just consume. I think that's what I think we've done well, and I think that's the same mentality with which we've approached the data space. I think when this was maybe a couple of years ago, we knew we were always in the data space. We're not new to this area. You know, we've been market leaders in storage for decades with EMC. So arguably a majority of the world's data and data centers runs on our infrastructure. So we know this space. But it takes another level of complexity to actually get value out of the data. It's not just about storing and computing. And so we said, what do we do that's different and that's unique to our DNA? And when we sort of take a step back and you look at how data platforms are really put together, there are really three components, right? There's the infrastructure at the bottom, server, S3 storage, networking. You got the middleware. You can choose whether it's a VMware-based operating system or an OpenShift, Kubernetes system, or bare metal, or something else, right? And then you have all of these software components. You got Starburst, Trino, you got an open source Spark engine, you got Iceberg, you got Parquet file formats, you got a Hive Metastore. I can go on and on, but the rate of change and disruption across these stacks is immense. We're talking thousands of combinations. Every single thing goes through a version upgrade. Every tiny little component is going to have a security fix. It's going to have a bug at some point. And what does an IT team have to do? They got to have like 15 phone numbers at the ready, and being able to triage and figure out whose fault this is and actually follow up and get a fix. This is a nightmare. And data platform engineers are under tremendous pressure. Their business is asking to get data faster and faster. And they go back to IT teams, and IT teams are saying, this is too much, right? There are too many data tooling in our environment, and it's too hard to maintain them. So we said, look, we have to take the complexity out, because ultimately, if you have to worry about every piece of the stack, you're going to start to reject piece parts. You're going to reject niche solutions, and you're going to go into all-in-one platforms, right? Jay talked about it at the beginning. People are going to start to favor less complex, easy buttons over piece parts that optimize a tiny piece of your stack, right? People are willing, I think, to forego hyper optimizing one piece for something that's actually easy across the board, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why we're, I think, uniquely positioned, because I think what we've been doing with Starburst is we take the market leading S3 storage, which is PowerScale and ECS. We take the market leading compute, which is our PowerEdge platform. We take Starburst, which is the market leading, query engine. We take Iceberg, which is now the market leading format. And we introduce a fifth thing into that mix. We call that the Lakehouse system software. What that does, it abstracts away all the complexity underneath that I just talked about. Which operating system am I running on? Which firmware? Which BIOS? Which Kubernetes system? You don't have to care. We don't want data teams to have to worry about stuff that they're not experts in, right? That control center effectively gets you 4 times faster deployment and saves you 60% time keeping lights on, because ultimately that's not value. So I think that combination of innovation is really what Dell's uniquely positioned in, and that's why I think the Dell Starburst partnership really comes together and makes it an easy Lakehouse. That's the goal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, David, I'll bring you back in to comment on this. Yeah, I remember I lived in Austin for many years, so I know a lot about Dell. I know a lot of people who worked at Dell. And one of the stories I heard a long time ago, when this just-in-time manufacturing was being refined and unveiled, is there were guys who would drive around in vans with motherboards in the van, and they would just drive around Round Rock, Texas, waiting to get the call. So they weren't like at a warehouse somewhere. They were in a mobile warehouse with products waiting to be called so they could zip in, drop them off. I was like, man, that's efficient. That is just really impressive that they're preparing to be, okay, put me in, coach. And now you're kind of approaching that from a data access perspective, right, David? You are, and you're again from the ad space, so you understand the criticality of latency, the importance of having lots of different kinds of data to kind of complete that picture. Because if you only have 60% of the picture in the ad business, you're probably not going to get the business. But David, maybe just comment on that real quick.
Yeah, I think I come at it from a little bit of a different space, because we're kind of more cloud first and then swinging the other direction and being pulled kicking and screaming into the on-prem space. So, like we're just hearing it more and more that even that customers want that. They want at least a hybrid cloud deployment, and they want, their data to be in a controlled environment. So it's been a really interesting journey where when we're moving data, we have to be looking at all of those variables, whether it's coming from an on-prem, whether it's coming from a hybrid cloud, whether it has to stay in that environment or go somewhere else. And to your point, I think that type of problem with data movement is something that we're just kind of starting to see and come into our own. I don't know if we're at the point where we're going to have anyone in a van with an Estuary CPU that's going out to an on-premise data center or anything like that. But definitely seeing a very wide, vast array of different environments that need to be connected into, that speak different languages, and you kind of have to be connecting data from them as sources and destinations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe, Justin, I'll bring you back in. We got about 3 minutes left in this segment. Future proofing. I mean, our TV show is called Future Proof. And the idea was that in a couple of years, you'll be able to look around and see evidence of the future that was being designed 2 years ago, right? In other words, right now we're working on the infrastructure of the future, and that's what we're building out. And I view this federated architecture, this distributed worldview, as really important because the world is always changing. I was talking to someone yesterday at the conference who was joking about, like, in the government, they're like, oh, no, you can't change any code. It has to be static and just it has to be exactly what it was. And they're like, dude, that's never going to happen. What are you talking about? Like, the world is always changing. So that's a recognition you need to have.
Yep.
To really play in this space, right? Is that it is going to change. So you need to be able to prepare yourself to manage that change, right, Justin?
Yeah, that's right. There's that old saying, the only constant is change, in fact. And I think that's certainly true in technology. And being able to build for that as a design criteria is, I think, really important, especially because the cost of change and the cost of time to change, can make or break your business in some cases. And I think, also consistent with that, with the rise of AI, use cases and AI technologies, like, AI is just, an engine for the data fuel, if you will, that you need access to. And it's all about getting access to the right data, relatively real-time data, and building an architecture that's going to allow you to do that in a cost-effective way. So I think really, what I encourage customers is think long-term, think beyond, a year or two, think about the platform that's likely going to be serving your customers for, the next 10 years, and what are the various points where that's going to evolve, and build an architecture that can withstand that evolution. And again, I think open formats and federation are key capabilities of providing that optionality.
Yeah, that makes sense. And people want their own tools, right? People want their own environments. They get acclimated to certain tools. And so you don't want to be pulling that away from folks. So you want to have to be able to manage that in a different layer. And that's where I get to, again, with this marshaling area, Iceberg being excellent for all kinds of different data, because you never know what someone's going to want. And you want to be able to facilitate access to the data. You want to be able to facilitate access to the algorithms. And you want to let the business users ask the questions that are meaningful for them, and kind of track that and understand that over time, and be able to provision what is necessary. Because as soon as that fluid connection, as soon as that fluid creativity is truncated, the analytical process just stops. And then you come back next week maybe and try again, right? But the point is, you don't want to have to truncate that. You want to enable that fluid environment, that conversation with the data. And we've got our next segment, final segment coming up next. That's one thing these LLMs are really, really good at, is allowing you to have an actual conversation with your data in natural language. That's what they're built to do. So we'll talk about that maybe in the podcast bonus segment. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a fantastic show. We've been talking to Vrashank Jain of Dell, Justin Borgman of Starburst, and David Yaffe from Estuary. And let's talk about the AI, and in particular, the large language models. They are not math engines, folks, at least not yet. I've seen on LinkedIn, people are poking holes in the large language model, saying, oh, I gave it this complex math problem and it got it wrong. That's because it's not a math engine. It's a text generative engine. And really, they're consensus engines more than anything, because what they do is they vectorize words and paragraphs and letters, and then they, based upon the prompt, will give you back what is similar to what you have asked. And so they're very good at giving you an average or a consensus on a topic, like how does a vacuum cleaner work, or how do ecosystems work in the environment. Anything that's been widely published about, they're going to be very good at. Anything that's not so much. But you got to understand the value of the tool. But in terms of talking to your data, Vrashank, I'll throw it to you first. We've talked about this for a long time, and now you really can have a conversation with your data, right?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a lot of experiments that start to show that. I think let's step back, right? Your data is in let's say an iceberg table. You're trying to query that data. If you were a real person, you would write a SQL query and you would try to understand what the data is. Um, just I think the thing that we have to do now is try to teach the LLM to write SQL. Now LLMs can write SQL, but it's not just about writing any SQL. It's about writing the right SQL. And
Right.
the difference between a real person and a generic LLM is that the generic LLM doesn't know quite what the data really means. It doesn't know what the columns stand for. It doesn't know what rev_q means. It
Right.
may mean revenue by the quarter, or it may mean something else. So there has to be something that teaches the LLM, right? I mean, you can call it prompt engineering, you can call it something else. But at the end of the day, you have to teach the LLM to know, to understand what the data is and how to read the columns and how to write the best query based on the prompt. And I think beyond just better text to SQL engines, you need this one little piece. I think that's what we call data products. Right? Data products are essentially a really good encapsulation of what does this data have, who made it, when was it made, who owns it, and what is it trying to tell you. Based on that, the LLM can then figure out which is the best data product and how do I write the query to get my data. That's, I think, the missing piece. And I think, we're really excited about bringing that data product capability into our platform, because that's what takes a generic question and answer to a very contextual, very high quality answer.
That's an excellent point. And Justin, I'll throw it over to you. I love that we're talking about data products now. I think that shows that data has finally arrived. We're not, you don't want the business users worrying about the technical details underneath, worrying about whether the ODBC connector is up to date or whatever. That's not their problem. You don't want them wasting brain power on that. You want them leveraging the data to understand the business challenge and what to do next. So I view this as a very positive development. And then these LLMs, to Vrashank's point, they can write code. That was my first revelation when I played with it. I'm like, wait a minute, if it can speak in French and German and Spanish, I bet it can speak in COBOL and JavaScript too. And the answer is, yeah, it can. But it's not a be-all, end-all solution. It's another very powerful tool in the toolbox to help us kind of understand, rationalize, reconcile, and then articulate what we want. Right, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that will become the eventual way that people interact with their data is through natural language, creating the right SQL. I think, there are some elements to be fine-tuned, as Vrashank pointed out, but it promises what we've been talking about for a very, very long time, many years, this idea of democratizing access, to anyone within an organization, because today, typically a data consumer is pretty sophisticated. They may have, years of Python engineering experience, or at a minimum, they know the SQL language. And if you can actually turn that into something that looks much more like a Google query, where I can say, hey, what was the revenue from last quarter? And I can express that in English and get a result. That's pretty powerful. That means now truly, everyone from the intern to CEO can take advantage of the data that the enterprise has. So I think that's the vision, that's the direction that we're all going. And just also to build on, Vrashank's point about data products, one of the nice things about that is not only are you able to curate the data, but it's also an effective vehicle to govern and secure it from an access control perspective. Because I think everybody's looking for this next frontier where we're able to incorporate our own proprietary corporate data into our AI projects. But you have to do that in a very safe way, right? If you're a bank, you need to also be mindful of regulations. If you're a retailer in Europe, you have to be mindful of GDPR. And so, what you expose and how, to your LLMs and to your various, AI initiatives needs to be very carefully governed. And if you use data products as a necessary component in that, that gives you the opportunity to really restrict exactly, what ultimately is available.
That's an excellent point. We got just about 2 minutes left here, a minute and a half. I'll throw it over to David Yaffe for final comments. I'm looking forward to having Estuary in a van driving around, but go ahead. What are your final comments?
Yeah, so I think I'm very excited about Iceberg as a format and how it's going to open up, and how Starburst opens up the ability for us to all be able to access this data in various different ways. Right now, there's a lot of incentive now that you can take your data in an open lake format. You can not only access all of it, but there's a lot of incentive for other companies and other vendors to create a community around it. Right? There's the capability to write Python potentially against this and turn it into a RAG model, and then even put it into a vector database afterwards. Have that be your proper place that you're storing all of your data, and then have the applications of it not just be one-sided, not just going into that for analytics, but coming out of it for every other purpose that you can imagine under the sun. So that's kind of like one of the things I'm really excited about too for us personally. Imagine real-time export of data from in an iceberg querying format from Starburst or something like that into other places that you want it.
Yeah, what they call reverse ETL, right? Like taking that great data that you've curated and certified and then getting it back into your operational systems. It's a two-way street. Well, folks, look these gentlemen up online. What a fantastic show today. Thanks so much to Justin Borgman of Starburst, Vrashank Jain of Dell, and David Yaffe from Estuary. This does conclude our show. Send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@dmradio.biz. We'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to DM Radio.